Okay, so welcome to our second Roses talk of the afternoon. We've just had a talk by Jean-Louis Fuy looking at forecasts, and now we move to something substantially different, but I expect to be equally fascinating. We have Vincenzo Alfano from the University of Napoli, Federico II, who is presenting. I presume it's Latin, the first part of the title, and so I'm exposing my ignorance. But an exploratory study on the impact of religion on violence in sport. As with the first talk just now, Vincenzo has about 45 minutes in which to speak, and then when he's done, there'll be about a 15-minute space for Q&A. So please do put questions in the chat. Keep your microphones on mute. And we'll have that time at the end. In the meantime, please, Vincenzo, take your talk away.
Very much, Professor Reade. May you see the presentation?
Not yet. It's on its way, though, I think.
Is it fine?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay. So thank you very much to all of you for attending this presentation, and let me take just 10 seconds to thank the leadership of Roses to give me this opportunity. So as Professor Reade says, I am Vincenzo Alfano, and today I'm going to present you in hoc signo vinces, which is, as you may read from the subtitle, an exploratory study on the impact of religion on violence in sports. While this may seem a very small niche, a very sub topic, as you will see in a few minutes, I think that there is an opportunity to see those results in a bigger picture and in a bigger frame. But as the first part of the subtitle suggests, this is still a research in an early stage, so please come up with question, remarks, critique, suggestion, because I really need it. So this is a brief outline of this presentation, and after this introduction, I am going to present you the work, to present you the model used to estimate this relationship, and finally, of course, the conclusion we may draw from this analysis. Let me make some very big statement. Don't worry, I'm going back to the point very soon. So what are the reasons that motivates this work? What is that make us suggest that it's worthy to investigate in this subject? Well, a very big question is, does religion still spur violence in contemporary times? So we know that during Dark Ages, there was a very important role played by religion in pushing people through violence, but does this relationship still exist nowadays? We aim to shed some lights on this, so on having the belonging to a given religion and having some view on what is an acceptable level of violence. Why this should be the case? Well, violence is regarded differently in different cultures. What is considered violent change with the change of the culture. And there are reasons to believe that this may also change with regard to the religious faith, which is, of course, a part of the culture of a person. Let me make a last very big statement, and then we go back to the ground fact. So we as social scientists, we may say with an extreme simplification that we are mainly concerned with three aspects when we build our models. Those are the incentive the agents have to face, the institution that operates in the where the agents operates, and the outcome they are pursuing. As Altman saying, people are not calculating machines. People are decision makers which are driven by both passion and reason. This seems to provide some support to the mechanism we just illustrated, because religion have the possibility to have an impact on violence, influencing both the passion and the reason of people. To make a more concrete example, let's think of the need to separate, to distance oneself from the mundane world, which is preached by some Far East religions such as Buddhism, or on the other hand, on the importance that many believers in Christianism makes on the importance of working very hard to don't waste the gift that God gave us. Finally, let's also consider that the belief on what will happen after we die, so the eschatologies and the existence or not of an afterlife, also may play an impact on the way people look at violence. So if I convinced you that there are some theoretical reasons to believe that religions may have an impact on violence, now we may come to the sport setting, which should be of great interest for this audience, because a fairly recent literature, it's underlying that professional sport, it's a quasi-experimental setting. And those are some of the papers that exploited these to draw conclusion that are way out the strict boundaries of sport. Why is it the case? Well, in professional sport, incentive and outcomes, if we come back to Altman's statement, are controlled by the rules, which are enforced by an institution. So if this is the case, we may measure which is the impact of violence with a quantitative analysis that uses data from the FIFA World Cup. Why the FIFA World Cup? Well, it's one of the most important soccer events in the world. And now, even if I am Italian, to don't make enemies on neither side of the pound, please forgive me if I use in this presentation the words soccer and football as synonymous. I am always referring to soccer, even if I use the other word. I know that on the two sides of the Atlantic, there are very different views on these. Soccer is a very good example to explore this analysis. Why? Well, because it's a sport which is not violent per se, it's not like a martial art, but at the same time, it's a sport that allows in its rules contact between the players. It's not like volleyball or basketball where the rules forbids player to touch, to enter in contact one with the other. So it seems a very good example, and if we accept that it is a quasi-experimental setting, maybe the perfect laboratory to study this relationship. So why all these should matter? Well, maybe this is of greater interest for this audience because it's related to sport, and of course it has some implication in forecasting and in understanding the determinant of a match. But as I said before, I believe that these may contribute to a way wider literature, which is the one concerning the impact of religion on human behavior. So, since the masterpiece of Max Weber, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, this literature has grown very much and has expanded, possibly more in sociology rather than in economics, maybe because the typical tool that we use in our analysis are not very good ones to perform, to study relationship between immaterial things, such as determinants and parts of the culture. So if this is true, sport as a quasi-experimental setting may be a very good laboratory to study this also with the typical economic tools of analysis. But why this is important? Well, we may derive insight of greater scope from this quasi-experimental setting, also to apply this finding to other scenarios. This relationship may help us to understand what is the impact of this part of the culture on violence. But as I said, this may also help forecasting soccer results and knowing it's more likely to happen if players belongs to a given fate. It may also help forecasting a player career, because if we know that there is this effect on his violence on the field, we may know in advance how his career is going to unfold, or at least we may know one determinant of the possibility of this. So those are some examples of some works that used sport as a quasi-experimental setting. Alfano and Capasso from 2020 uses table soccer results to derive insight in general on people working in a different context to the one they grow up in. Caruso et al. In 2 papers in 2015 and 2017 studied aggressiveness and national identity through soccer results. So those papers are a very good point of start to understand how we may use sport results as a more general laboratory to derive quasi-experimental findings. So to the best of my knowledge, this is a novel work in the sense that no one specifically addressed our research question using football data to try to answer it. And of course, other than this more broad literature about the impact of cultural characteristics on violence, we also contribute to the literature studying the determinants of performances in football. So, coming to the data I use in this quantitative analysis, there are, of course, two main variables, which are the operationalization of violence and, on the other end, the operationalization of religion. The former is computed through this equation, where VO, that stands for our violence variable, is computed by summing up Y cards, double Y cards, and R cards times 2, and dividing these sums per matches. As you expected, Y cards is the number of yellow cards that Team I received in ERT, while double Y cards is the number of second yellow cards that the same team received in the given year, and finally R cards is the number of red cards. This is multiplied by 2 in the equation to have the relative yellow cards average. All is divided per the amount of matches the team played to have a measure of the per match violence in terms of yellow cards, given that R cards it's multiplied by 2, and of course this is an assumption that a red card is equal to 2 yellow cards, which is not exactly precise in terms of violence, but seems reasonable. All the raw data from which I compute this variable are taken from the FIFA website. This is a Euler diagram that shows that actually what the actions during a game that leads to a card are all referable to violence, while not all the fouls are reconducted to a violent behavior. All the cards are, especially not all to, of course, to physical violence, but all of them are referable to verbal violence, such as insulting the referee or something other than, of course, example of physical violence, such as full tackles. So the other main variable in this study is the religiosity of the team. So I do not have access to statistic on the religiosity of each single player that played the FIFA World Cup in history. So those are inferred from the general population that the team represents. As you know very well, FIFA World Cup, it's a cup between a national representative. So what I do is to take data from the general population and report it to the teams. Why? Is this an acceptable assumption? Well, I believe that there are no specific reasons to believe that the very top end of the distribution of this soccer ability variable is different for religious belief from the rest of the population. So while, of course, it's very unlikely to find fat people in a national representative of football, given that to be fat has an impact on the ability to play soccer. On the other hand, religion should be orthogonal. So, stochastically speaking, if we take a random observation from this set, which should be something very similar to what the national team coach does when he selects the representative of a given nation, it should have the same characteristic from orthogonal variables, orthogonal, of course, to this imaginary variable ability to play soccer, as the rest of the population. Of course, it's possible to have outliers, to have players in a team that have religion belief different from the rest of the population, but from an asymptotical point of view, this should be relevant, and so those outliers should be captured by the error 10. The source of this data is the RCS-DEM 2.0 dataset in its countries-only specification. It is a dataset that covers 220 different independent states and has observation for each single year from 19,000 to 2015. It's important to this, given that the last year for which data are available is 2015, and there has been a World Cup in 2018, data from 2015 are imputed to the 2018 observation in the World Cup, because there are no more up-to-date data. We may fix this as soon as they get out with a new edition, but so far, as far as I know, there are no. There are many variables in this dataset. We believe that the most useful to proxy the religiosity of a given players belonging to a given team is the one named percentage of believers, which is the variable counting the percentage of the population belonging to a given religion. So there are many different variables for the several different religions included in the dataset. In this work, we only focus on 4 major religious denominations, given that for many other religions that are still present in the dataset, data are very, very tiny. The fraction of people following a given religion, it's very, very small. And thus, this may, of course, affect very much the assumption on one end and the estimates on the other. So the 4 major religious denominations that we choose are the 4 major religious denominations in the world, namely Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Buddhism. Plus, we have been able to take some of the different confessions of those religion denominations and run estimates also for this. Those are some descriptive statistics about these 4 variables that proxy religiosity. So the share of Christians within a nation, of Muslims, of Jews, and of Buddhists. As you may see, especially for the last 2 specification, we have maximum and mean variable very much smaller than for the first 2. This is of course due to the representativeness of a given religion in the population. There is not much we can do to fix this, but it's important to point this out because, of course, this may be a problem in the interpretation of the results of the regressions. So with all this data plus more that we are going to see next, we build a panel that includes all the editions of the FIFA World Cup from the first one in 1930 to the last one in 2018. The basic unit of observation of this panel is each single national team. Of course, this leads to some choices that have to be done to regard to the ID over the panel, since in those almost 100 years of history of the FIFA World Cup, there are some countries that either changed name or split it up in more than one country. As a general approach, we consider that observation that changed name to be the same country all along the time frame if there is a substantial continuity of the entity, even if it changed name. For instance, Soviet Union is considered as the same of Russian Federation after the fall of the wall, because we believe that in that case there was a substantial continuity of the entity, the statal entity. The same happens to Zaire. On the other hand, there are some examples in which countries secede, and this is especially important in our sample for Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia split it up, becoming Croatia, Slovenia, Slovakia, and thus in that case, we may not consider more than one country to have an ancestor in just one country. So we consider these as different entities. The ID of the panel are different. Anyhow, I played a bit with these, making some robustness check, seeing if the results change according to a different identification strategy for what is continuous and what is not in the panel, and the results basically are robust, are the same. So, to try to answer to our question, so if there is an impact of religion on the violence behavior in soccer field, I estimated the following equation where, as you may see, it's a very simple model where the violence of team I in ERT is explained as the result of a number of covariates, which are going to see by one, plus religion, which of course it's the variable of major interest in order to answer our question. And as usual, there are both a constant and an error term at the end. The covariates that we think are important in order to try to explain this relationship, other than our dependent variable that is violence as we see, so the sum of yellow, double yellow, and red cards times 2 divided per the number of match the team played, are HSOC, which is the number of years that elapsed since the first game that the national team played. This is a measure of the popularity of soccer in this given nation. In that case, only to disregard to the computation of this variable, when a country split up in several different countries, we keep the years because arguably the tradition is in the culture of the people. So there is still tradition, even if the country gets, even if a new country was born from the previous one, people kept their tradition. Why we do this? Well, the idea, of course, is that more years pass since the first game, the most soccer is popular, so it should be a good proxy for the importance of soccer in a given country, and has to be preferred to FIFA rankings, both because it's easier to have it available for very old year. We may have this variable computed in the 1930 edition of the World Cup, the first one. It's harder to do FIFA rankings back in time, and also because FIFA rankings are biased, as suggested by Macmillan and Smith. Another set of covariates is the host and the win. Those are both dummy variables where one signals the hosting team and the winner of the cup. This last variable is easier to explain. This arguably picks what was the best team of the edition that could have a different impact on the violence, and thus it is taken out from the sample by this variable discriminates for this. On the other hand, the host signals the hosting team for two reasons. The first one is that actually players playing in front of their own supporters, because arguably, of course, the hosting team has more supporters than the other teams playing the cup, may have a different attitude in regarding to violence because they play in front of their own fans. More importantly, there are in the literature several references that talk about the possibility of referees of being intimidated when there is a public supporting one of the teams. So, of course, also these, given that our measure of violence is derived from the cards, may play a role. Thus, it's important to discriminate for the hosting team of the World Cup. The other covariates are D32, which is a dummy discriminating per the edition of the FIFA World Cup that had 32 teams. This is important because, of course, even if it's averaged by dividing per the total number of matches played by each team, the number of total matches may have an impact on the cards, and thus it's important to discriminate between the people participating to the final phase of the cup. Then we have match, which is actually a matrix of dummies that discriminates per the amount of matches the team played. There are several dummy variables, one per 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7 matches. Of course, one of the possibility of the total amount of matches played is omitted to avoid falling in the so-called dummy trap issue. And this modality is 3, so all the coefficients should be read as a reference to the omitted variable, which is 3 matches. And this is a way to discriminate per the strength of the team in this given edition of the Cup. With HSOC, we may know the popularity of soccer, but we know nothing about how strong the team is in a given edition. We may have a country of very old soccer tradition, but in a given year, it has a very weak team because of random events and generation of players and injuries and so on. On the other hand, we may have a very young country that has a very strong team 1 year because as a player very, very strong. And thus the amount of matches, it's a good, this set of dummies is a good proxy to take into account how strong a team is in this given edition of the competition. Finally, we have the year, which is a max list of dummies that assume the value of 1 per each and any edition of the FIFA World Cup to take into account each general and cyclic effect that may be there. And the rel, it's the variable we saw before, so it's the share of population belonging to a given edition, religion or confession in some of the specification of the model, as we will see. To avoid the problem of multicollinearity, given that the sum of those 4 major denominations may easily sum up to 1 for many, many countries, we put just 1 of these rel variables in each specification. So the data, of course, have several observations for each team, so for each I, and several observations for each T, because there are more teams each year. So a good choice for the estimator seems to be a feasible generalized least square that should correct the estimates per the bias due to the repetition in the panel of observation that have the same ID, so basically are the same observation observed in time, or on the other hand, for observation in the same year. Of course, we may estimate it both with fixed or random effect. As a standard, we did an Osman test to see, given that we do not have strong theoretical reason to choose one over the other, and this suggests that a random effect is more efficient, and that's why we run a random effect, and then the estimate. But before, there is a preliminary question that may be useful in order to answer, to try to shed some light on this relationship, which is, there is an overall impact of religiosity on sport violence. What I mean is, other than the given religion, and so the given set of belief that being a part of the culture may play a role in influencing the behavior of the players and thus their violent approach. Is it possible that violence is spurred by the fact that people believe in something rather than people come from a more secularized country apart from the kind of belief player have? So we try to answer this preliminary question using another variable that it's available in the same dataset, which is an overall measure of religiosity that is called non-religious people. So this is a share of people for each country and each year that are religious, so believe in, regardless from the specific religion they believe into. And so this is a first regression in which, as you may see, the share of non-religious people with all the control, it's not statistically significant. So this seems to give no support to the hypothesis that there is a general effect of society with more believer on their national representative team with regard to the violence observed on the field. This, of course, tell us nothing about the single religions, which, as I tried to make the point before, being a part of the culture may play a role in affecting people's behavior. So as very well explained in the seminal paper of Professor Nord in 1991. So this is a kind of institution, of course. So this is an informal institution that affects the way people look at the glasses that people put when they look at the world, and thus affect the actions that people may do. So what happens looking at specific religions and confession? Well, here we run 4 different specifications of the model, which is the same apart from the last variable, rel, that is operationalized in 4 different ways, namely with the share of Christians, of Muslims, of Jews, and of Buddhists in a given society. So, as you may see, there is an effect, there is an impact of violence on the share of Christians. So, if our assumption stand, the more likely the presence of Christians is in a given national team, the more violent this national team is. This effect is of a very small magnitude, as you may see, but we are going to discuss this, and statistically significant at 5%. On the other hand, the greater the share of Muslims is, the less violent a team is. This effect is unfortunately statistically significant only at 10%, but as you may see, the observations are not very much, even if it's a complete sample, because we took all the possible observation from the first World Cup in 1930 to the last one in 2018. Observation varies slightly because in some countries there are no data about the religion. That's why observation change, because when you put in some shares of believers, in some combination there are no available data. So this is a missing observation. On the other hand, as expected by looking at the descriptive statistic, there is no statistically significant impact, nor from the share of Jew people, nor from the share of Buddhist people. This, of course, may be due other than to the fact that these religions do not impact the violence of the national team, to the fact that those religions are not very well represented in the sample, and thus the effect is not statistically significant. Coming at the covariates, as expected in the bottom part of the slide, the year of soccer tradition, so the length of soccer tradition is negative and statistically significant. So the more popular, the more long the soccer tradition of a team is, the less violent it is. This may suggest that it is a good proxy to the ability of a team, or to the class, we may say, of a team in playing soccer, because it's the aspect that we expect on violence. And the same goes for the team who wins the competition. Instead, indeed, the D-win dummy is also negative, even if just 10% statistical significance. On the other hand, we, even if the sign is the one that we expect, there is no statistical significance in hosting the World Cup. So the team are do not have any impact on the violence of the team being the hoster of a World Cup. And in the last edition, which are the one with 32 cups, I do not remember exactly, but I would say from the 1972 or something like that, we observe a greater violence. This, of course, may be due to some change in the rules, and other than to some changes in the attitude of the players. Of course, there is not much to discuss for matches and years, because those are matrix of dummies. So it's important to include it to capture fixed and cyclic effect, but there is hardly any economic significance in this. So we rerun the model, this time using, instead of major religion, some confession of the Christians that still are available in the dataset. So there are data about these four big confession in which among which Christianity is divided. There are way more than these. And so Western Christianity, which is not really a confession, but it's a way the dataset divides people not belonging to Eastern Christian confession, which is the second variable, Catholic, of course, and Protestant and Anglicans, which are computed together in the dataset, and that's why are together. There is no specific theological reason to have them together. As you may see, in that case, there is no statistical significances at all, and this, of course, may be due to the fact that while we look at a confession, for obvious reasons, the share are smaller, and thus the assumptions are harder to be kept. On the other hand, when we look at Muslims and we do the same exercise, looking at the different confessions in which Islam may be divided, there is an impact of the Sunni that have a negative and statistical significant effect on violence, and it's pretty much the only significant one in confession. This is possibly due to the fact that Sunni are the one most represented in the countries that take part in the FIFA World Cup, and thus it's the one for which we have more data, and so more statistical powers in number, and that's why the significance, we observe a statistical significance. Of course, we played a bit with this data, trying some robustness check using, as I already said, both alternative measures of identification on country with a team. So when a country changes its name, what if I consider this not to be the same country? What if I do? And also playing a bit with the operationalization of violence. So what happens if I count only yellow card, only red cards, and if I multiply by 2 also second yellow cards, and so on? The results are very similar. Concluding, we may say that there is a statistical significant relationship between the presence, the popularity of a given religion in a society and the violence we observe on the soccer fields of its team in the FIFA World Cup. Christianity and Islam specifically seems to affect the violence of the respective national teams, while the effect of the Christian is positive with regard to violence, the opposite results is shown per Islam. When we look at confession, the only statistical significant results is for Sunni. The magnitude, as you have seen, the magnitude is very small, the coefficients are very small. On the other hand, it's also important to notice that in these world-class top-tier events, a single yellow card may have dramatically effect on the final outcome of such a short competition. It has consequences in terms of missed next game, or also just in the psychological attitude of the players that may be more scared of making a decisive tackle, and thus it may lead to different results. Finally, even if I do not have to stress the importance for soccer to this audience, maybe for other economists, the sport economy is not that interesting. So these results may also be seen if one accepts the data that soccer is a very good laboratory to run quasi-experimental analysis. We may overcome the boundaries of sport and accepting that this is a result in the relationship between belonging a religion and having a violent disposition. Of course, with all the assumption that we made, and with all the caution that it's needed in such a study, that even if there are some theoretical references, it's basically very much data-driven. The results may be explained, as said, with the Googles that one puts when look at the world and the impact that religion has on these lenses, given that it's a very important part of the culture and may play a role in how believers look at life and thus how they behave. This may be expanded, of course, either replicating the analysis on other sports, even if, as I said, football, it was a very good example for its rules, and also analyzing other cultural characteristics. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Vincenzo. I'm having the same issues as before. My computer is very slow today, so I'll try and get through all the questions that people have put up. So the first thing Carl says that he would be thinking about variations on your dependent variable a little bit, and I'm sure you can probably think about this. The idea that a match with 4 red cards being twice as violent as a match with 2 red cards, maybe that's not necessarily the case, and perhaps there were transformations. And I can't remember the exact specification of your dependent variable as to whether it's both teams and their number of cards. But Carl says, well, it takes 2 to tango. Does the violence in a match not depend on the opponents that you're playing? So if it's a team that's more aggressive or more known for bad behavior, cheating behavior, maybe you accumulate more cards as a result.
So yes, this is a point, and that's why as a robustness check, I tried playing a bit with this variable, trying to compute it in a different way. But of course, he's completely right. It's we may not say that a red card is twice as violent as a yellow card, or the other way around. On the other end, even that this is true and this is a big limit, it's very hard to address this, because what is exactly the point to which the ratio between a yellow and a red card? It's very hard. Unfortunately, I was looking for reasons for which cards were given, because this could be useful in order to try to clean this data, but unfortunately I have not been able to see, not even in a cumulative way, the reason for which the cards were addressed. On the other hand, while, of course, asymptotically assumptions are very hard to be made with 450 observations, theoretically speaking, these should clean up. The more you add observation, this problem should get solved, because also the fact that referee are not do not always use exactly the same rule to judge behavior. Those are, of course, all problems. That's why we call it a quasi-experimental and not an experimental, because, of course, we may not control all the influence. But yes, this is true. This is something to reason about, and to see. If it's harder. Even if very interesting, it's harder for me to believe about the rivalities, because we are talking about national teams, and we are talking about almost 100 years. So I do not see how Italy should be in 2006 should be than in 1972. I mean, this is a bit harder for me to buy, but maybe it's just the way I look at football. So for clubs, you have these big rivalries, and you have a smaller time frame. For national team, I don't know.
Okay. Georgios also makes that point as well. I think that you're leading on to there about rivalries, because he says, well, derby games, e.g., Brazil versus Argentina.
Yes, it's true.
And whether a team wins or loses, quality of the opponents may well be strong determinants. And I think I missed it during your talk because I had a few connection issues. But you're looking at a team per World Cup year as your unit of observation rather than the match level, right?
Yes, because on the other end, the problem is, okay, there are two problems to have it at a match level. So we have one observation of team per edition of the Cup. So yes, it's one per year. Of course, if you do this per match, you multiply the number of observation, and on one end it's good, but on the other, and you may take care of all these rivalries by, playing with dummies and seeing who is playing with who. On the other end, it's harder to believe that this is due to the team, because you have each single match history to take into account. So you need to take care of the single derbies, the frustration, the result at mid-game. I mean, I don't know if you go into an overfitting situation, but this is something that if data are available, which is another pair of hands, it could be interesting to develop. So to see how this change, looking at single matches as unit of observation rather than the overall amount of cards taken in a given edition. This may be interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying that this data certainly exists, and many more international matches than just the World Cup matches exist as well as in terms of databases and so on. And I mean, just to go a little bit further, Supriya has also asked the question, which is almost asking you even more than that. It's saying, well, actually, the number of red cards is endogenous to how many red cards they've been in the game so far. So if there's been 2 red cards, perhaps you're more likely to get a red card because there's already been 2 red cards or 1 red card or something. So I mean, that's going even further, saying that it's actually the appropriate level of analysis might even be sub-match level potentially.
Yes, so the suggestion here is that, but this is a problem if you do it at a match level. It's not anymore such a big problem looking at the whole edition, because of course the amount of cards you get in the second match of the edition, it's not really, with a new referee and a new team, it's not really dependent of how the first match unfold. So I mean, maybe I am missing something, but as I see the story, this is more important if you do it at the match level rather than at the edition level, in which these exist, but it's like diluted in the observation, because it's already summed up. I mean, all the teams have had the same opportunity of not getting a second red card in the or a third red card in the match.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the point is actually saying that maybe you need to go even below match level, because within a match, whether you're likely to get a red card or not might depend on what's happened in that match before. And equally, again, going on the match by match idea, presumably also how likely you are to get a red in one match might be a function of the previous match, because you've lost a player due to having a red card, and so you're weaker as a team, and so therefore you're more likely to get yellow cards and red cards as a result. But just to move on, because we've got about 5 minutes of time left and a few more questions. Zach asks, well, he prefaces what he says by saying that he has very limited soccer knowledge. But he says, can your measure of violence be thought of as a measure of how physical a team is? Physicality may be a playing style for certain teams, which can have its pros and cons. Thinking of your measure of violence as instead of physical playing style, do we still have the same theoretical priors about their linkages?
Yeah, I mean, there are several reasons that may lead to a yellow card. And not all of them are related to how physical a team is. So this is good food for talk. I mean, I may think about this. I don't know how, honestly, to, I don't think that there is a linear relationship between how physical a team is and how many cards it gets, but for sure this may play a role. Yes, it's possible. Yes.
Great. Okay, that's pretty much that in terms of the question. Surprise got a clarification. Surprise says that he meant to say that if a certain team has 2 red cards, it would not only would it impact their ability to get more, but also incite the opponent's violence. So there might be other red cards for the other team. But that's just basically expanding on the same point. Sebastian Otten has got his hand up. Sebastian, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, I would like to ask a question. First, I think it's a very interesting topic, Vincenzo, but I'm not so sure whether you can really identify in your model what you would like to identify, because if I understand your regression correctly, you more or less put in religion, and religion is more or less picking up everything which varies over the country time unit. So I'm a bit worried that you are picking up a lot of other factors. So for example, there's a very interesting paper by Edward Miguel. You might know it. It's from 2008, and he's looking at soccer violence and the effect of exposure to civil conflicts in your home country. And all these kinds of factors you might pick up with your religion variable. So I think a first step would be, and I don't understand why you didn't show it to us, would be to include a kind of country fixed effects, or at least region fixed effects. I think you didn't include country fixed effect because you are more or less than losing your variation in religion. Yes. So that is the reason, right? And then you can argue, okay, I use random fixed effects, but the problem is religion is picking up a lot of other stuff. And what I would like to see is that you at least show us a battery of robustness checks where you include a lot of other variables which vary over the country time unit, so that you can say, okay, if I even include all that stuff, religion is still having an effect. And then we can say, okay, religion might give you something. Otherwise, you are picking up everything else which is varying over country time. And the first thing would be like, okay, maybe it's exposure to civil conflicts, because there's a paper by Edward Miguel, right? And I think that is very close to your paper. He's using individual data. But yeah, I think that is some point you need to address to make it a bit more convincing.
So may I?
Got a moment, yeah, go on, Vincenzo.
So thank you very much. This is a good remark, especially for the regional dummies. Just one point that I would like to make is that with the exception maybe of Zaire in 1982, you don't really have a country affected by serious amount of violence reaching the World Cup. This is a subset of countries, the one playing the FIFA, which in general are not torn by civil war. But yes, your point, of course, stand that basically you are saying you have omitted variable that you pick up with religion, and this has to be addressed. Yes, for sure. Thank you very much.
I think when I might add that, so we all have, I guess, in mind when you are interested in football, we have these assumptions that in South America, people or the league is more violence, right? I mean, you could at least start with that and putting in some region dummies. And I think I just looked it up in the paper by Edward Miguel. I think he found that Argentinians and Chile and Colombians are getting more yellow cards. So you can pick up like some South American, some European variation with that. So that would be maybe the first step, and then going on from there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Seb. Thank you, Vincenzo. We're going to wrap up there because it's now 4:30 UK time. That's a really interesting talk. Thank you, Vincenzo. Spurred lots of discussion. Hopefully you can see the chat, because there's also Carl's added an extra point about your estimation strategy, which again, echoes quite a few of the points that Seb made. But in terms of wrapping up, once again, thank you, Jean-Louis. Thank you, Vincenzo. Really interesting talks. We're going to return again next week with Mateus Galdino, talking about gambling with leadership succession in Brazilian football. But we'll leave it there, and wish you all a fantastic rest of your days and weekends. And thanks again, everybody.
Thank you very much.